Recording live from our remote command facility inside the pyramid at the Luxor in fabulous Las Vegas. This is Dine Drink Vegas, the podcast for and usually by people stuck at home wishing they were in the land of neon lights and bad decisions. But for episode Yo 11, this craps-centered theme that we're going to do today, we are actually on site in Las Vegas. I'm your host, John, also known as the Baller on a Budget, and in this episode, we're going to give you a rundown of our guys' trip in Las Vegas, and of course, as always, we're going to get to our drink of the day, which is a special one for us in a lot of ways. But now, it's time to bring in the founder of Dine Drink Travel, the high roller of the high plains, the king of comps, the leader in the luxury lounge, the man who is sadly now waiting for the limo to take him back to the airport so he can go home to the far, dusty, dry reaches of West Texas. It's Bill. Bill, come on in and say hello.
Hey, John, how are you?
I am good. I have to say it's a little bit bittersweet because we're going to start as we always do with our drink of the day. And listeners, our drink of the day is not something we normally drink. So, Bill, why don't you explain this?
So, we are this is the annual Labor Day trip, and there's a group of guys who comes on this trip. This year there are 5 of us, but we are flying the missing man formation. Normally there would have been a 6th, my brother-in-law Mark, and he died, I think, about 3 weeks ago now. But Mark loved Coors Light with a passion and intensity I can barely describe. So we are, in honor of Mark, drinking Coors Light. Also, this is one of those things you can pretty easily get from a floor hostess when you're sitting donating your money to the casino.
Yes, absolutely. This is a beverage you can get any time of day in Las Vegas. It is not my favorite, but I do miss our friend Mark. So cheers, Mark. We wish you were here. And other than the sense of sadness and loss that we are missing a very vital member of our group, how's the trip been?
So this has been, as Vegas is wont to be, as streaky as a trip can possibly get in all of the senses. My first meal was at Luxor on, this is Monday. I guess that was Thursday night. Wow, I may have been in Vegas too long. And Luxor has always been my favorite restaurant in the world, and it just wasn't very good. But then Friday, we wound up going to Retro by Voltaggio, and that was amazing. So food wound up going on hot streaks and cold streaks. Gambling wound up going on hot streaks and cold streaks. It's been a good trip. But, yeah, I mean, if you spent any amount of time in Vegas, you will understand the streaks, which most notably have happened at the craps table.
Yes, and we have played an awful lot of craps. That's why we're calling this episode Yo 11 instead of 11, because when you're at a craps table, live or virtual, there are certain numbers we don't say because craps players are paranoid. And of course, we never say out loud that number that falls between 6 and 8 because that ends badly. And it's just, I don't know, it's a craps player thing to say Yo 11 instead of 11. I feel very silly doing it, but hey, Vegas, so we're doing it.
We are. So can I talk a little while how we all got into craps on this trip?
Yeah, and I think I've got a different path to it than you do, but in your case, it definitely starts with
my buddy with the nickname of Zero, who is a world-class statistician. Like, he is better at math and statistical computations than anybody I know. And when he gets to Vegas, he loses his dang mind. And he sits, whatever, he does all of the craps things. And if you want to hang out with Zero, you're going to be at a craps table. So we spent like 572 years this weekend around electronic craps tables. And just like blackjack, just like everything else I play here, there were sessions where I didn't understand how I'd won several $100. And there were sessions where I was like, wow, all that money went quickly.
Yeah, and that's, it goes that way. And I will say, too, I think Zero's a little disappointed because you and I tend to gravitate towards the electronic versions of craps. He likes the live table better. So even though I'm, pushing 50, I didn't start going to Vegas until later in life. So by the time I had the discretionary income to visit this town, I missed the golden era, and I cut my teeth on video games. I like the electronic version of the game. It's even fun when there's a big group around, but you can play it if you're the only one that feels like playing. And, there's pressure that comes with the camaraderie of a big, busy table I like the pace of the electronic game. It feels less rushed. I guess sometimes a little antisocial. If I want to socialize with strangers, I'll go up to the bar and play video poker and start talking to a stranger. For some reason, when I'm in craps mode, I like the electronic game better. And I know that's going to be controversial, but that's kind of my take.
So I almost never want to socialize with strangers. I guess I paid too much attention to the stranger danger things they told us in the early 80s. But I do want to hang out with my buddies that I came on the trip with. And one of the great things about the electronic craps machines they've got now is you can have 4 or 5 of you sit around it, so you're still gambling, hanging out with your friends, and not so much having to talk to random people you don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a good middle ground, and I've really had a good time with it. So do you have a basic strategy for craps? Because I think yours and mine are slightly different.
So what I've been doing, and I think on craps I may have won money. It's hard to disaggregate that from the blackjack, where I am certain I lost money on this trip. But what I do, so those individual numbers at the top, what do you call those bets?
Yeah, it's a little too early in the day for me to recall, but basically those are numbers that could be the point.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So all the numbers which could, and that should tell you something, listeners. Of we are still baby craps players.
Yes, we are.
I know every hand in the book for blackjack. Craps, I'm learning. But what I do is place a bet on all 6. Okay, on the come out roll, I'll play the pass line, and I'll play the field bet. After we've set the point, I'll make sure I've still got both of those bets out. Then I'll bet on each individual number on the top line, and then I'll lay odds on whatever the point is, which means that any number but 7, because I'm good enough at math to realize that saying 7 doesn't make it more likely.
Right, yeah.
Any number but 7.
We're not at the table. It's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Any number but 7, I wind up winning. Now, sometimes I wind up winning not a whole lot, right? Like if I'm betting $5 a bet, I might win 83 cents, net on the 5 after all my other bets get taken away. But it seems to be working. I know that I get really excited when the point is a 4, 9, or a 10, because that means I've got, let's say it's the 4. I've got a bet on the 4, and I've got a bet on the pass line, and I've got odds on the pass line, and I've got the field bet.
Right.
So I win like 4 times, and I'm briefly happy till we keep rolling.
Right. So my strategy is a little bit more conservative, but of the bunch of guys that come out here, I probably have the second lowest bankroll, and I'm not a big gambler by nature anyway, so I'm not, I'm trying to minimize my losses and stretch a small amount of money to be a lot of fun over the weekend. So I tend to go pass line and 6, 8. I tend to only lay odds if 6 or 8 happens to be that, because they're statistically more likely to come up than the other numbers that are up there. And I don't tend to take the field bet because, it's not a standing bet like the pass line and the others. Every roll you could lose whatever you put down, and volatility. The volatility is not something I like.
I get that. I get that statistically that bet doesn't make sense. I just happen to have kept winning on it. Yeah. So cool. I will say the horn bet, if you're betting on rolling a 12, which pays 30 to 1, that looks like a great deal. And sure, if you hit that, then you've got a big payout. But you're only going to roll a 12 one time out of 36, which is giving the house roughly a 16% edge. So there are bets on the craps table you very clearly want to stay away from.
Yeah, and the horn bet's one of them, because you can hear it calling you to the rocks like the sirens of old. Like it seems, because you actually have 4 of those, because you have the snake eyes, the 3, the 11, and the 12. So you have 4 things that you could hit, and all of them have at least 15 to 1 or better payout. But let's say you put $5 on the horn, what you really have is $1.25 per bet. Right. So you're not getting 15 to 1 or 30 to 1 on your 5, you're getting it on the $1.25, right? So it feels like a way better bet than it is.
Yeah. I've also discovered a new game this trip that I think I like, called Free Bet Blackjack. And I realize Vegas never does anything because it's good for me, right? Like that's not how this goes. But it was fun, and on that game whatever. I lost a couple $100 several times. I won a couple $100 several times. I think it washed out pretty well. But what it is whatever the table minimum is, you bet that. And there is a side bet that you bet for a minimum of $5, which is usually what I put there. And here's what happens. How the casino gets you is if they get 22, you push, and that kind of stinks.
Yeah.
But what you get for your money on the main bet, if you've got any pair that's not tens, you can split them. And you can split them indefinitely, and you don't have to pay for the split bet.
Oh.
And that's actually kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
And they also let you do things like at one point, or earlier this weekend, I split aces like 3 or 4 times. So they're pretty generous about what they'll let you split. And if you've got a 9, 10, or 11, you can double for free. So let's say you've got $25 down, and you've got a 9, and you're showing against a dealer 10. You still double because you're now the next $25 isn't yours; it's the casino's.
Yeah,
which means that you've paid $25 for a $50 bet. The economics of the game changes, and what the side bet is if you've got one thing in a hand where they put a little gold coin out to indicate that whatever you're playing on casino money for part of the bet. If you get one gold coin, the side bet pays 3-1. And if you get two, I want to say it was 15-1, 30, and it goes up from there. But if you split a couple of times and double down on some of the splits, you can see some people winning some crazy amounts of money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like if blackjack met the lottery and they had a baby.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm sure mathematically the odds are still on the house, so they're tempting you in with the potential for a big payout, but they're bleeding you elsewhere, like with the 22 being pushed and that kind of thing. Yeah.
No, I'm not arguing it made math sense, but I'm in Vegas. None of it makes math sense.
Right.
It was fun.
So weirdly, because my approach to the casino, because I am not a big gambler, and I think I've told the listeners this before, I treat going to the casino like I treat going to the arcade. We've got a chain of movie theaters in Texas called Synergy, and they have a huge arcade. And I know when I walk in there, I'm going to lose X amount between me and my 8 million children all running around playing video games. And I tend to budget my casino very much the same way I would budget taking my family to the arcade. And once that money's gone, it's gone.
Right.
If I'm upgrade, if I'm downgrade, I am not risking anything that I need to pay a bill.
Which is one of the reasons I like the group of guys we go to Vegas with. We have a lot of fun, and more fun than is probably appropriate for men of our age, but nobody risks their marriages and nobody risks their mortgages. Yeah. And I appreciate that about this group of people. We're
not going to need a criminal lawyer or a divorce lawyer. We're not doing anything hugely unethical, which probably makes us one of the more boring Vegas podcasts, because you're not going to get a review of certain things because we're not going to them.
Nope.
But part of that is because we both outkicked our coverage in the women we married, and we don't want them to rethink their life decisions. So I will say, if you travel a lot and you like MGM properties, I will put a shout out for the MGM MasterCard, because like I said, I don't gamble a lot. So over a whole weekend, I'll have like a couple $100 as my entire bankroll to last, 3-4 nights. But I'd built up some free play. So this morning, I was a little bit down on the trip, and I cashed in $60 worth of free play that I'd earned by buying groceries and gas station burritos all year long. And really, I've built this up over the last few months, because I had spent all my free play when I was here at New York with my wife back in July, and I was already back to $60. I ran my $60 worth of free play. I went to the high limit slots, and I turned that $60 of their money into $200 of my money. And I'm really, really, really happy, because that's not a life-changing amount of money. But given the scale at which I tend to gamble, that's good. Like I'm going home with more money than I left with. So,
winning that money got me a free beer, so cool.
Yeah, hey, worked out.
Right. So we're not, me and my roommate, as well as one of the other guys in our group, have been staying at the Delano. And what is your take on the Delano as a place to stay?
So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, because we brought up, we've done your review on the Delano really the last 2 episodes. I will say, I agree with you that for the trip we're doing, you probably want, if you're doing, a group of guys and you're looking at, or a group of any type of people, I suppose, doesn't have to be guys. I don't, whatever. It's 2023, he, she, they, them, whatever. If you're doing a group trip to Vegas, and now I just lost our one very conservative listener from Alabama. Anyway, sorry. If you're doing a group trip to Vegas, having at least one person spend the money to go ahead and get a suite at the Delano so that you have a living room and a sitting area and an extra half bath. And I think you're absolutely right. But you can see we're in my standard Pyramid King room. This saved me a lot of money over staying in Mandalay or the Delano, but I'm a 5-minute walk from y'all's suite. And this is not bad. I'm not slumming it here. This is still a very nice room.
This is actually a great room. I will say it's also it's huge as regular hotel rooms go. The reason that I like the Delano is this is very specifically a trip where we all bet on football games. And that, because it's an all-suite hotel, we have plenty of space to sit around, watch the football games, and we went to the liquor store, got a couple of bottles of bourbon, and had them in the room. That was a way cheaper way to have cocktails than going to literally any bar.
Yeah, I mean, we would have, our whiskey bill alone would have been $300-400 between all of us had we sat at a bar to watch the first half of that game yesterday. So yeah, if you're doing a group trip, everybody chipping in so somebody gets a suite is a good idea. But again, this is one of those compounds, and we talked about it on the last episode, where, if we were bringing somebody that was really broke on this trip, they could even save a little bit more staying over at Excalibur, and you still can walk from Excalibur to Mandalay without ever going outside into the elements, which instead of being blazing hot, have been oddly humid and rainy since we've been here.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to. Is that just seasonal rain? That hurricane passed through 2 weeks ago now, so it's not any of that.
Yeah, I don't know. El Nino, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it's. If you come to Vegas on one of the 3 days a year when it's raining, the weather here is actually pretty pleasant.
Yeah, it is. The only thing it cost is we had thought about doing some pool time. We opted not to with the weather, which worked out fine because nobody wants to see any of us in swimsuits anyway. So
no, that's not healthy for anybody.
No, it doesn't work out well.
What has your favorite meal been on this trip?
So I got here late Friday night, so I missed a couple of the meals. I think I've got to say Saturday brunch at Border Grill was my favorite. Hot Bar House was really good. Libertine Social last night was really good, but I think Border Grill was the winner for me.
So you had some tiny little issues with the airlines and weren't able to join us for dinner on Friday night. Actually, I think your flight originally wouldn't have gotten here in time.
Yeah, I wouldn't have made dinner no matter what. I was just 2 hours later than planned.
But the three of us who were here in time for that meal went to Retro by Voltaggio, I think, which is over in the Mandalay Bay. I think that was my favorite meal of the trip, and this is a trip where I went to Luxor. It's just so part of it is because I'm the age I am, and everything about it screams my childhood, right? Me and Zero and our buddy Mike took a picture inside of a human-sized Game Boy, right, with our faces showing up through the screen. Because that seemed like a good idea. There were Rubik's Cubes decorating. They had 80s trivia cards sitting on every table. The plates, they were glass plates or whatever, right? They were a hard material, but they were textured to look like those Dixie plates for every church picnic you went to in 1982. Yeah. It was great, and the food was really good. I got a Wagyu beef cheek pot roast, which was the kiss of the gods. Mike got the Voltaggios, but so it was designed to look like SpaghettiOs, just with homemade pasta and a sauce that doesn't make you hate your soul. Yeah. The presentation was good. The service was good. We wound up getting a tasting menu the night before. I got to Luxor and paid an obscene amount of money for their tasting menu, and I'm still salty about that meal. But we went there. The tasting menu was $99, so it's not that it's a cheap meal, but you can get your head around that. But we got 4 courses out of it. Yeah. And they were every single, so there were 3 of us times 4 courses. There were some repeats. We probably had 9 or 10 different things come out to the table. Every single one of them was good, right? I enjoyed everything that came out on the table. Yeah, Retro by Voltaggio was my highlight meal. And to what I said about Luxor, that's always been my favorite restaurant, but I wouldn't go back. If that would have been my first trip, there would never have been a second one. It turns out the problem was one of the waiters had called in sick, so they didn't have enough staff that night, and things kind of got off kilter. And it was still fun. Like, everybody who talked to us was lovely and gracious. The food tasted good. The food was beautiful, but the service was a little bit off because somebody was out. And there were, on the multi-course tasting menu, there were fewer choices than there used to be without having to pay a supplement, which, no. Anyway, so that was a disappointment on this trip.
I will say there's one other food disappointment, and it hasn't affected me greatly because I haven't stayed up all night, although, Mike and I did go out for snacks pretty late the first night I arrived. One of the downsides of the Mandalay Luxor complex, you're pretty far down the strip, and it makes walking to other properties difficult. You're a little bit isolated in their ecosystem. But because Mandalay has this big, fantastic pool, you're going to see a lot more families than you do at some other places on the strip. And as a result, there's a lot less open super late into the night. So if you get the late night munchies, if you're a little over Vegas and you need a snack, and it's, say, 1 a.m., there's not a ton of options in these buildings. Like, Mike and I wound up with Subway on Friday night of a 3-day weekend because it's literally the only thing still serving food that we could find with its doors open. And I feel like that's a disadvantage on this end of the strip, that you need some more late night cheap eats.
All right, so let's talk about that as we get a little bit closer to the end of today's podcast. Let's talk about this trip next year, the Labor Day trip next year, because I think all 5 of us are going to be back. There are 1 or 2 other guys who are talking about coming, and the highlight event of that trip is going to be the LSU football game. My buddy Mike, God love him, graduated from LSU and is going to want to go to that football game. And while it will burn my Aggie soul, I will go with him. I think we're all going to go to that. And that would suggest heavily staying at the Delano or the Mandalay Bay because you can walk across to Allegiant Stadium. However, as you've pointed out, we are kind of on the far end of the strip, and that makes it harder when there's other places you want to walk. Essentially, a lot more things are a cab ride instead of walks. So for this trip next year, given that the highlight event is going to be at Allegiant Stadium, but everything else won't be, where would you stay?
I think I would move a little closer to the center strip. I think I would be looking at Park MGM, New York, maybe the MGM Grand, although I don't care for the Grand. I think it's far too cavernous a property. I like smaller places I can navigate easier. Because if you're at New York or Park MGM, you just hop over to the Dirty Castle, get on the tram, and boom, you're here. The tram stop, you come right down the stairs, and then you're not that far from the hallway that goes over to the walkway to Allegiant Stadium. I might be tempted to do that, partially because you do have a wide variety of rooms at different price points with that setup, because if somebody wants to go luxurious, you've got the Signature over at MGM Grand. You've got Nomad on top of Park MGM, so you've got some hotel within a hotel options. You could still get a suite, but there's a lot more going on around you for not football day.
Okay, so that makes sense. I will say, it is 2 hours earlier here than it is back home, which means by the time it gets to be about midnight, 1 in the morning, I'm kind of done anyway, and I'm old, right? So I don't need the late night stuff, but I do, like what you're saying makes sense. I do know that it's almost certainly going to have to be another MGM property because our buddy Zero gets such good comps here. That's what he's going to want to do. And frankly, you and I, who aren't huge gamblers, we get pretty good deals if we book it far enough in advance and all of that.
Yeah, like this trip was probably the least good deal I've gotten from MGM in a little bit, partially because we changed plans for this trip pretty late in the game and prices crept up. By the way, that's one of my baller on a budget tips. Book as early as you can, especially on major weekends. The closer you get, the higher the price. Book early.
No, absolutely. You're correct.
Yeah. And that gives you time because you can always, like, if there's a sale that pops on, you can always call up and say, hey, I noticed the rate drop. Can you match that rate? They will.
Yeah.
Right? Even if they say they won't, they will, because you could cancel it and rebook at the lower rate. So
they might as well.
Yeah, it's an academic. And by the way, I've had that conversation with customer service before. No, sir, we can't match that rate. Okay, if I cancel and rebook, will I get the rate? And the lady went, I see your point. I'm matching the rate now. And that was it. That was the extent of the conversation. So, booking early makes all the difference in the world. And if we weren't football centered, I think I would be ready for downtown on that trip. But yeah, you're right.
But we are God-fearing Texans. We must be football centered because that's the law.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, we're probably pretty close to wrapping it up. So while we sign out, Bill, any words on between Formula One and all the rain, how has traffic and navigating been?
So on Saturday, me and a couple of the guys went to downtown. It was fine getting there, but then they closed some ramps and some of the roads were shut down with rain. And it took us 30 minutes just on the part of the drive between the Bellagio and the Mandalay Bay. And I didn't want to stiff the cab driver, so we stayed in the cab, but it would have been so much faster to simply get out and walk.
Yeah, it's a little crazy out there, and I think part of it is Formula One, part of it is deserts don't do well with rain, but other than that, I think we've had a good trip. So we're going to wrap it up from here. We thank you so much for listening. Bill, where can people find us online?
You can find us at dinedrinktravel.com. You can find the YouTube channel Dine Drink Vegas, and our handle is Dine Drink Vegas on pretty much any of the social media outlets.
Yep, that's it. We thank you so much for listening. Keep an eye on that YouTube channel, because if we've made a trip, that means fresh content will be coming your way. Most of it by Bill, because I am a terrible video maker. So we thank you so much for listening. Please keep doing it. Happy travels.